Grenades in Guatemala, sanctions on Syria, and activists get arrested. All that's coming up today on The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you wouldn't mind, please like and share this podcast. If you're so inclined, leave us a review. They really help. I'm off to Syria today, and since I probably won't have tons of bandwidth while I'm out there, I've put together some very special episodes that'll be airing over the next couple of weeks that I'm sure you're going to love. Here's a little teaser of what to expect.
We're so good at going in and taking out the enemy, taking down a regime that's doing things the wrong way.
Your eyes will begin to bleed, your nose will bleed, your saliva will be tinged with blood. Eventually, the virus breaks down the entire tissue of your body and you die.
Really worked hard to try to pare down my equipment to the absolute minimum.
She said, have you heard of the Russian mafia? If anything happens to me, then maybe you'll be in the news.
It was a fire that I've never seen a fire burn or start that fast. The entire town is largely gone. We lost our home.
You're not going to want to miss some of these exclusive interviews. You might not realize it, but this is true first source journalism. You'll be hearing some content straight from the experts and those on the ground. And I'm doing my best to include the full kind of long form interviews rather than just sound bites, so you can really get the full picture of what's going on. Bottom line is, you aren't going to get this information anywhere else. So if you want to impress your friends with knowledge about the important things happening around the world, stick around. Also, I've started a sort of fun tongue-in-cheek side venture that is going to be airing on this channel. It's what I'm calling the Toxic Masculinity Minute, and I'm amazed at the traction it's getting. I'm just picking stories of honorable men and sharing them with you in a very short and shareable format with a mix of humor and powerful points that'll make a mockery of the toxic masculinity movement that's become so popular in American culture. My point? It's okay for men to be dangerous, to be heroes, and to conquer. And it doesn't have to be toxic when men act like men. I wrote a book about that subject. It's called Making Men: 5 Steps to Growing Up. You can get a copy of that book by going to patreon.com/hotzone and subscribing to this podcast. I hope you will. All right, on to the news. A grenade went off on a bus in Guatemala on Monday. Nobody was more surprised than the guy who was carrying the grenade. Apparently, he'd been planning to threaten the driver with that grenade, but didn't have sufficient grenade training or something. The alleged attacker was critically injured, as were 6 other people. This is part of a long-standing trend in Guatemala of violence against buses and bus drivers. Organized criminal groups regularly extort bus drivers and then rob entire buses. Disorganized punks sometimes try it as well, although maybe not as good of the outcome. A friend of mine in Guatemala had her phone stolen when 2 kids got on a bus and claimed to have a gun and then robbed everyone. And when they tried to leave, the people realized they didn't have a gun and they beat the tar out of those 2 kids, which is good. But this is why you can't have nice things, Guatemala. This is why so many of your people want to run away to the United States, where people don't rob buses with hand grenades. But rather than run away, the men in Guatemala ought to be demanding a hard stand against thuggery of all kinds. And they need to be empowered by their government to take back their country from the criminals. That's just my opinion, but I think it's the only long-term solution. Now, there are places in Guatemala which are relatively safe, and sometimes there are areas where the drug traffickers are most prevalent. The narcos don't allow the criminal gangs like MS-13 to rob and cause trouble in their areas because they don't want the police presence that petty theft brings. I did a report on this shortly after Donald Trump was inaugurated. Check it out. Right now I'm at a very remote border crossing between Honduras and Guatemala called Aguascalientes. And I was just talking to the police here and found out something interesting. Back before January last year, they were seeing 3 or 4 busloads a day of immigrants coming across here, people from as far away as Africa, Pakistan, Nepal, all heading north to the United States. He said that since Donald Trump has become president, they've seen here the number decrease to the point where now they have maybe 30 in a week rather than hundreds every day. And so it's been a huge decrease. But the real problem that they still have here is the movement of drugs across this border. And that's because with weak enforcement over the last 8 years of the Obama administration, the amount of cocaine being produced in South America has gone up tremendously. And we're talking about 150% in the last 3 years. And so the amount of cocaine coming north is increasing as well. And this is a highway for those kinds of drugs coming north, most of them headed right to the United States. So one of the drawbacks of the way that the Obama administration starved the U.S. military is that it really had an effect on drug enforcement as well in Central and South America. And that's what we're seeing here along this area. There's actually not a lot of crime here, and that's because the narco traffickers don't want a lot of police presence, so they keep things pretty calm in this area and don't allow much crime. But at any rate, this problem will only get worse if we don't deal with it as a nation soon. So they don't grow much coca in Guatemala, but the areas that are transshipment corridors tend to be safer for the average person than other areas as the cocaine moves through there up into Mexico and bound for the United States. So while the cocaine industry is a huge problem, for some Guatemalans it brings really the only security they can count on. Okay, the European Union imposed sanctions Monday on Russian military intelligence chiefs over the nerve agent attack on a former Russian double agent and his daughter in March of last year. If you remember, Sergei and Yulia Skripal were found poisoned in Wiltshire, west of London, and spent over a month in the hospital. Both of them eventually recovered. It was a scene right out of a spy novel where the pair had been exposed to a nerve agent called A234, which was developed by the Russians and delivered in a perfume bottle. Sergei was a British double agent with Russia, and so they tried to off him. The really unfortunate part of this story is that the Russian spies who tried to kill Sergei apparently tossed the bottle full of nerve agent out the window of their car or something, and it was later found by a man who gave it to his lady friend. She sprayed a bit of it on her wrist to see what it was and then died as a result. That really sucks. Never sniff perfume you find on the side of the road. It's a good rule of thumb. The sanctions levied this week also cover a Syrian research lab for allegedly making nerve agent. As terrible as that stuff is, terror groups are more likely today to use nerve agent like mustard gas or sarin in a planned attack than I believe at any time in recent history. That's because ISIS spent a lot of time and money developing the means and the know-how to make nerve gas and then employed it hundreds of times against the Kurds and the Iraqis. I myself reported on this during a trip to Sinjar, Iraq in 2016. When the Islamic State pushed into northern Iraq in 2014, most of the ethnic Yazidi residents of the area were forced to flee. In November 2015, Kurdish Peshmerga forces were able to recapture a portion of what they'd lost, including Sinjar, a city that was once home to 500,000 people. But the fight rages on. The Peshmerga may have driven their enemy out of Sinjar, but ISIS isn't giving up so easily. On the new front line, Peshmerga soldiers are living under daily low-grade attacks by snipers and indirect fire. So it's about 8:30 in the morning. It's a beautiful morning. The sky is incredible. The birds are chirping. And ISIS has been shooting at us all morning. Just sporadic fire, mortar rounds coming in from that direction and landing over here in the center of the city. Also, we've had just sporadic. So there's a couple of mortar rounds right there. Now that means we've got about 15 seconds before we find out where they're going to land, and they've been landing over here in the center of the city. But it's a kind of scary feeling because you don't have any control over where they're going to land, and if they land right here, it's game over. Oh, you hear it? There it goes. Landed over this way. So these Kurdish soldiers that are holding the front line here in Sinjar, they have to put up with this constantly. It's not really intense fighting. It's just very low-grade fighting most of the time. Once in a while, there'll be an attack, but it's mostly sniper fire and this indirect fire that they have to worry about. We've come here to see evidence of an attack ISIS made recently employing chemical weapons a form of warfare that most nations have banned for more than 100 years. We traveled to a field just outside the village where the front line is today, and were careful to stay upwind from the site of the attack. On the 11th of February, ISIS fired over 30 mortar shells from off here to my left into this village, now being held by Kurdish forces. And the shells didn't explode like normal mortar shells would. Instead, they released a white gas. And I'm here over a week after the attack, and even right now, there's a very pungent odor of rotten vegetables. That's indicative of a mustard agent. And you can see some residue here from the explosion that has this black tar substance on it. And I think this is pretty serious. The Kurds thought so. They came out here and covered up the craters made by the mortars because this stuff is still highly toxic, very dangerous.
When they went off, we could see the white smoke in the distance.
CBN first learned of the attack from my friend Dave Eubanks, who heads a humanitarian group that was here giving medical training at the time of the attack.
When the attack happened, we were on the front line training Peshmerga right down there. We heard about it. We came here, and what we saw were shell craters with black tar all around them and stinking and reeking. We tried to stay upwind of them, and these 120 millimeter mortar rounds. And then we began to talk to some of the patients who had a hard time breathing. They were constricted in their throats. Their noses were burning. 30 people sick right away. Now over 175 people sickened.
We went to meet the doctor who treated the victims in the tiny Peshmerga aid station.
Fever, vomiting, headaches, diarrhea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And bad breathing?
Breathing, yes. It's this gas, upper respiratory system.
Upper respiratory.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So the doctor has, they've taken samples of the residue from these mortar rounds that came in, and they're waiting for somebody to come and test them. No one has come, and they're pretty baffled by that. They're wondering why nobody really cares to come and test this and find out what kind of nerve agent it was. Not long after we left the clinic, one of the soldiers injured in the attack showed up asking for help from Eubanks' medical team. But before they could begin treating him,
Oh gosh. Okay, I go get it. It's very sick.
Yeah. Lord, I ask you heal this man and help him recover.
we rushed him to the clinic where the doctor did his best to treat him. But his condition didn't improve, so he was sent by ambulance to the nearest hospital, more than 2 hours away.
Important test examination. Anybody come here? No, anybody come here to take test examination. What is this gas?
We just don't know. Is it chlorine or is it mustard or is it something else? And that's why we need people to come and test this. The doctor was appealing, please someone come and test so we know, one, what it is so we can treat our people, two, so we know how to guard against it if we get hit again.
As the ambulance was leaving, ISIS started shelling again.
We got to go for the bunker. There's another incoming round. You stay right here. Is that it?
That's it. Line over here.
You gonna get your binos? The fight dragged on, and someone called an airstrike, while the Kurds fought back with their own weapons. As for the chemical used by ISIS, no one is sure what it is or where it came from. Now the biggest concern is that ISIS could find a way to transfer these weapons into Europe or even the United States. But for now, the Kurds are doing their best to keep them occupied here.
A-10 just came over and lit up those positions.
From northern Iraq, I'm Chuck Holt for CBN News. Now, even though ISIS no longer has the wherewithal to manufacture nerve agent, they reportedly published the instructions for how to do so on the dark web, where any other terrorist or madman can get his hands on it, which is just wonderful. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't the last we see of nerve agent being used as a weapon of mass terror. Lastly, today, a group of activists were arrested and charged with trespassing or something on the southern border because they were putting out water bottles to help illegal border crossers make it into the United States without dying in the desert. The group entered the Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge in 2017 without a permit. Oh, the humanity. And they walked on places that weren't designated to be walked on. So they got misdemeanors for their efforts from the good people at the Department of the Interior. And I've reported on these activist groups before. The problem as I see it isn't that these kids were wanting to help people or even that they entered a wildlife refuge. I mean, who cares? I was with a Fox News team back in 2015 when some of our group got arrested in that very same wildlife refuge. Those guys don't play games. But I mean, it's a desert, seriously. Walking on it's not going to kill it. Besides, thousands of illegal crossers are walking on it every month. The issue I have here is that sometimes you can do things with the best intentions, but actually be hurting the people you're trying to help. Leaving water for crossers only encourages more illegal crossers. The most loving thing to do is sometimes to take a hard stand and actually make it harder for people to break the law, not easier. But in the great scheme of things, you could do worse things than give a thirsty man a cup of cold water. I get it. I think that these Department of Interior stormtroopers need to cool their jets a little bit. I mean, geez. All right, that's all we have for today, folks. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to come back for a whole slew of special interviews over the next couple of weeks. I'll send some updates from Syria when I get a chance. Between now and then, I hope you'll come back and watch. Thanks for being a part of the Hot Zone. I'm Chuck Holt.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.